Okay. Well, it's 1 o'clock. I think a few more people will kind of trickle in as we get started. But we do have this recording, or we will be recording it today, and so if anybody misses anything, we'll have access to that. So I just want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's approximately, maybe about 45 minutes. It's going to be, if you've attended this before, it's typically conversational style. We'll do introductions in a bit. There's a Q&A box in if you look at, there's both a chat and a Q&A box. So if you have questions as the webinar goes on, put it in the Q&A. And if we can answer it during the webinar as it goes through, we will. Otherwise, at the end of today, Dion and I will kind of systematically go through all of the questions and tackle them at that point. And then at the end, we'll send out a summary to everybody who's on today's call with access to recording and the slides. Uh, so real quick, I'm Danny McGee. I'm Vice President of Innovation at Foresight. And if you've attended other webinars that we've done before, you've probably seen my face. But we have a new face today, and that's Dion. And Diana, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dion Glasser. I'm the SVP of Sustainability, Social Impact, and ESG at the Uplift Agency. I lead all of our client services team across all ESG, sustainability, and social impact issue areas. And I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you.
Yes, we're extremely lucky to have Dion on today, and this will be a fun conversation. So real quick, as Dion mentioned, she's representing Uplift, and I'm we're representing Foresight in this conversation. Foresight is a sustainability and environmental health and safety and energy consulting company. We provide consulting services across a range of compliance to voluntary efforts as it relates to your facilities and organization and products across carbon management, utilities, energy engineering, environmental health and safety. We are what you might consider your outsourced sustainability manager.
Yep. And Uplift, we are a sustainability, social impact, and ESG consulting firm that works across those service areas you'll see on the right hand of the screen. So basically, every topic that falls into those meta categories, we've got technical expertise in, and then we also have a strong communications and creative team to balance that technical work with telling your story in a way that is accurate and compelling. And we work across the three different areas as strategic advisors, helping to guide and help you make the right decisions about the work you're doing. As implementers, sort of your outsourced team, your hands and feet to help you where you may not have internal resources. And then as communicators and educators, helping to grow your internal capacity, awareness and understanding, and your ability to really take the sustainability work in-house and continue to advance it as you go on.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge, like, as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between what Foresight does and what Uplift does. And we see that as an advantage. We think that this work is inherently collaborative. It requires, and we'll talk about that even today, it requires a lot of coordination across a lot of different departments at different levels within the organization. And so, these types of collaborations, both in the consulting space, but also internally, only really help to elevate the work, make it work better. And we fully see Uplift as a partner on a lot of different projects, and we're happy that they share that with us. So, we're here to talk about regulation and specifically around non-financial disclosure, and specifically around the California laws. At least that was as of yesterday morning, the what we were going to talk about today. Um, as of yesterday, some of the we have to kind of acknowledge that the California laws have had that the Ninth Circuit suspended or kind of put on pause the 261 and then extended the deadline for 253. And in some ways, there's a version of this where that could change what we were going to talk about today. But I think actually Dion and I talked this morning, and I don't think it actually changes really the message of today's webinar, which is there are a lot of regulations. California was one of them, right? And what we wanted to do was just kind of use that as an example of responding to what is increasingly being required across multiple different municipalities and states and countries across the globe. I think just kind of as a level set, we don't want to just ignore the fact that these California laws and what's required of them has shifted in the last 24 hours. But at the same time, I think that the message only becomes more relevant as we kind of go forward. And so, as a starting point, like I think we'll just stick with these, and maybe Dion, you can kind of explain the journey of these laws and like how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely. And good acknowledgement, Danny. We'll be talking a little bit about how this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals thing factors in. And I think this is honestly perfect timing to have this conversation. So, um, what we've experienced over the last 20 years has really led up to these sets of laws going into place. And Danny, just like you said, we're seeing across the globe different government levels. We're seeing increasing requirements around transparency when it relates to emissions and climate risk. California signed into law in October 2023 both of these laws. And as you can see on the screen, 253 focuses on emissions disclosure annually, 261 focuses on identifying and managing climate risk, and that's every 2 years with different thresholds for compliance. But what we've really seen is that as climate risk and emissions disclosure work has advanced from a regulatory perspective, a couple of years ago, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission was working on a rule almost identical to this at the U.S. national level. And there was a lot of flip-flopping and a lot of lawsuits that didn't go anywhere. And it took a really long time to go through the public comment process. And what we really saw happen was when it appeared that there may be a significant change in political leadership in the US, California just was like, you know what? We're the fifth largest economy in the world. We're not going to sit by and let this type of work potentially go away depending on what happens with our national administration. So they just came in and they're like, we're going to pass this at the state level. And so where we're now seeing this regression in climate-related U.S. federal action, California is stepping more and more into this leadership position to prevent the U.S. from impacting global progress in this area, right? Because the state is the fifth largest economy in the world, there's a lot of opportunity for impact. There's also, because of that, a lot of opportunity for challenges to these laws. And so, Danny, as you were saying, there have been a lot of legal challenges over the years to both of these laws. Some are ongoing. We heard yesterday, there was a temporary stop of enforcement of the Climate Related Financial Risk Act 261. And that's really so that the challenge can make its way through the courts. We've seen other challenges be denied outright, but they're being elevated further and further through the federal system. So what we are seeing so far is, and how we feel and we're advising our clients is that while there are all these pendulum swings and there's so much disruption within the US, but also globally around sustainability compliance and laws and regulations and disclosures, what we're really seeing is the best course of action for companies to continue to move forward with this work. And we expect that it is quite likely that, the reporting deadlines, that the regulatory requirements will still hold.
And, I think maybe you could also speak a little bit to like if I think if we go to the next slide on this, um, you know, what this isn't, California's not passing, someone might disagree with this take, but California's not passing laws for fun, right? They have an ultimate goal, and you kind of noted that. What is it that they're actually trying to accomplish in in the law and in the disclosure piece of this?
Yeah, there are a lot of different reasons. As I'm sure most people on this webinar know, California's seen a lot of climate-related migration out of the state in the past couple of years, um, and other reasons, but they have consistently seen an increase in severe weather events impacting their communities and their economy, right? More and more natural disasters, wildfires, flooding, et cetera. And so there's a lot from that perspective that they're trying to figure out ways that they can address what they have within their area of control as a state itself. In addition to that, though, and just sort of more broadly speaking around emissions disclosure and transparency and climate related risk, at the heart of all of this is it helps investors make informed decisions. So climate related financial risk disclosure came out of, it's not from a do-gooder perspective. It came because investors want to know that the money they put in is going to be safe and it's going to yield returns. And so there's a lot when you're talking about the fifth largest economy in the world, there's a lot around that in the state wanting to make sure that investors still feel comfortable investing in certain businesses, many of which have headquarters or very large footprints in California. And so part of this is holding those companies accountable from a climate reason, but also to help protect investment in the state and the businesses that operate there. It improves financial market transparency, supports the allocation of capital, and helps inform that. Another reason is providing necessary information for the companies that have to disclose to identify and then work to address, manage, and mitigate their climate-related exposure. And that's really, from a business lens, the most important piece of this is there's business value to doing this, and that in turn is beneficial to the state because it can keep the economy going because it's helping the companies operate in there continue to operate in a way that's more resilient and resistant to this increase in these severe weather events.
Yeah, I think like my own journey on kind of just trying to better understand where a lot of these regulations have materialized out of, and kind of like if you trace this back, you can see that the 2008 financial collapse was a major player in kind of this realization that there are metrics that matter in the stability of our markets. The Financial Stability Forum became the Financial Stability, was it Board, the FSB, right? After the 2008 collapse, and they're tasked with financial stability. And one of their kind of like underlining principles, and I think why this is important is understanding the why behind this kind of just helps companies understand like what are we trying to do here, right? And one of the main principles around that they approached post 2008 collapse was that markets can't price risk they can't see, right? And so this wasn't, as Dion mentioned, it wasn't an environmental movement, it was a risk movement. And so this is ultimately at the core of what we're talking about, right? It's like transparency in the market prevents and prevents crises because it allows for risk to be better seen. And at that time, there's a recognition that there are risks inherent in systemic in the market that aren't being seen and that investors don't have clarity on. And so then you see, both like Europe and also UK and Australia and I mean, California and other states and countries, aligning with that kind of same principle. And you can actually see, like, the FSB created, I'm going to say a lot of acronyms, but the FSB created the TCFDs for non-financial disclosure or climate-related financial disclosure. And TCFD is kind of the underpinning. And when we talk about this internally at Foresight, we talk about like TCFD laws, essentially, which is stuff that has incorporated the recommendations of TCFD now is becoming regulatory. And the California law is a perfect example. The CSRD in Europe is another perfect example. And I think of it a little bit also as like an international building code that's like slowly being adopted at different levels within different regulations. It shows up slightly different, right? I'm based in Michigan. The building code in Michigan is very different than the building code in Colorado, where Dion is. But like ultimately, both of them are based out of a lot of the same principles. And so I think what that allows for us to do in this exercise is say, like, oh, hey, if we focus on these principles, then we can actually focus on not chasing each one of these regulations but we can focus on using those principles to better our own, corporate strategy and value that we're bringing into the marketplace.
And that's exactly right, Danny. And I think at the heart of all those, seemingly disparate laws and regulations, et cetera, that common underpinning of TCFD, at the heart of TCFD is identifying, understanding, and mitigating what is ultimately economic risk, right? And so the through line between SB 253 and SB 261 is that, when you talk about climate risk in SB 261, at the heart of climate risk is the increase in global emissions. And so where 253 comes in is it's, saying, hey, in order to understand climate risk across the globe, because they don't stop at the borders, we have to understand each business's contributions to emissions. You all as a business need to understand that, right? We're increasingly seeing government agencies see climate risk as a major national security threat, which the US Department of Defense has identified formally years ago and maintains that climate risk is a major national security threat. It's already exacerbating global stressors. And it threatens infrastructure across the world. There are already military conflicts where natural resources are at the heart of fighting. And so there are ways that what we call, I guess, sustainability cross into this global economy, and providing visibility and resilience around climate risk is a really important thing to focus on.
Yeah, I think we'll keep reiterating it. This is all climate disclosure, right? We're talking about like taking that risk, assessing it, and disclosing it out into the space and doing it in these different mechanisms. And it's really a financial stability project. It is all about investors caring that their money is going into places and that they understand the full picture. And it's about businesses being able to quantify that and articulate that and then report that in a way that is understandable within and across multiple markets. Now, having said that, we're at a moment in time where the ecosystem looks like this. We're at a moment in time where that is showing up in a very kind of disparate, lots of different standards and acronyms. And I mean, just in the last, in my, trying to understand this, looking at the FSF turning to the FSB, creating the TCFD that's now owned by the IFRS, that's ISSB, that's reported in the CDP and the GRI. Like these are real, right? And it feels incredibly overwhelming and also incredibly disparate. And so it is, I think, I do want to acknowledge, like, we're up here saying, oh, it's all, just understand the why and you'll get it. And then we throw a slide like this up on the screen and say, go forth. And so, I think Dion, how do you kind of make sense of this? What's, how do you make sense of the chaos as, when you work with clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things we really focus on is where there are commonalities across these. So if you are talking about climate risk, specifically emissions and climate risk, let's say, we can gray a ton of these different logos out. That was magical. Great timing. And what that does is it narrows the focus. And what you'll see here, TCFD, just like you said, Danny, which got folded into IFRS, those two kind of become the same exact thing. But then when you look at all these others, let's go down to the lower right, the UK, the EU, state of California, Canada, etc. They have their own versions of the same laws that follow the same underpinning of TCFD, right? Same holds for CDP. When we talk about CDP GRI and even EU CSRD, the way you're supposed to track and disclose emissions on an annual basis follows the GHG protocol. And so when you drill down, there are commonalities and it starts to become a little bit less overwhelming there. With the lawsuits that we're seeing, some companies have waited until the last minute to comply and are starting to scramble. Some companies have been doing this for years in preparation, for example, of CSRD. And so we've started to see companies being forced to kind of sort through and then see these different commonalities. But what we are always doing with our clients at the very beginning of a project is helping them to focus this overwhelming slide. Like, let's cut out all the noise. Let's focus on that awareness and understanding of where these things come from, where there are commonalities, so that you're not so overwhelmed, right? And so because TCFD was integrated into IFRS S2 a few years ago, we see that reduction. When we see CSRD, the EU saying it was built off of the climate risk portion was built off of the principles of TCFD. It starts to become a lot easier to see those threads and to cut
Yeah.
out that noise.
It feels like there's like a thread around carbon accounting, which is, greenhouse gas protocol, and that has stayed pretty consistent and has stayed pretty consistent for a long time, right? And
Yeah.
and now there's a thread that is materializing around the risk piece of this, and then, we have I think a slide later where we kind of talk deeper into the types of risk and opportunities on this. And to the earlier point, like, that we're not, I don't think we want to, the message isn't, oh, you can stop there. But I mean, this is the case with being international or even, across multiple states in the US the way that regulations show up in different states, might be, might be different on the surface, but substantially you kind of have to track a lot of the same stuff. You have to manage a lot of the same stuff, and you have to kind of make decisions around the same stuff. So environmental laws have been, similar in nature for a while. And so I think, you know, uh, I the message has been don't chase the regulations, kind of focus in on what's on these like risk and carbon accounting pieces. As someone said in the office this morning, the companies that aren't calling us this morning are the ones that already have been working on this, right? And so they're not really concerned about whether or not a law is being held or paused. They have already kind of moved the ball and they're starting to chip away at all of these different disclosures. The ones that are scrambling are the ones that scrambled and are will continue to scramble until they start to get the work done. And I think, maybe Dion, you can speak a little bit to, uh, your approach okay, now, like, how do we get started? When do you get started? What do you prioritize those pieces as we kind of, look at the different regulations kind of being materializing across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree strongly with this don't chase the regulations approach. We're seeing a lot of companies panicked right now because they waited too long. And then with what happened yesterday, there's so much confusion. You know, with this likely to go forward with California, I'm not a legal advisor, so this is just purely my own personal opinion based off of all the legal challenges that have happened to the SEC rule that's based on the same thing, and those were dismissed, and all the other lawsuits that we've seen going up to this. We are in a time where, in the US in particular, but also globally, there is a ton of uncertainty. There's a lot of just sort of crisis management. Something was one way one day, and then it's completely different the next day. And so, you know, this is this is not different in that respect in terms of it's just another version of, tariffs coming
Chaos.
down out of nowhere and companies having to shift. And so the way we're working with our clients now and the way I like to work is let's not create a cross crisis where there doesn't need to be a crisis. We got enough going on right now, just like you said, Danny. The companies that aren't panicking are the ones that have already done this because they know it doesn't matter which way this swings. They're likely going to have to do it in the future in some other way, right? CSRD is a great example. There are other states that have been working on their own version of these laws that, let's say things don't do get held up with California, they can restructure the laws in their new law in a way that does pass muster, right? And so I don't think there's anyone, at least on the sustainability side, that thinks that this is just going to go away. With California, there's a very, very real at this moment $50,000 per year non-compliance fine. And that enforcement of the law has been funded by the state. And that is a signal that they are going to be holding companies to a $50,000 non-compliance fine. So digging out of non-compliance, after being behind just compounds the issue. And at the heart of this, honestly, there's value in doing this work from a business perspective, regardless of the laws. It's why TCFD and IFRS were created in the first place. And so, if you're able to focus specifically on the why and the business value, all of the rest of this legal stuff is just noise. And so, to that tip of don't chase the regulations, you're doing what's right for your business. And oh, you're also going to be in compliance with laws when they start to hit.
Yeah, and I think and even to just, to kind of narrow in too on like where do you start, right? We talked about carbon accounting, right? That one, and we've had lots of different other webinars on that. I think the new one in this space has been climate risk, and I think one of the kind of challenging aspects of climate risk is that companies are now being judged a lot by their value chains, not just by what's in their four walls, right? And so um, maybe I think we can dig a little bit into, what does it mean to evaluate risk, right? And then what does it mean to kind of better understand your value chain, right? And what does that look like upstream or downstream from you? This slide I think I like a lot. This helps me really kind of just like um, uh, formulate the kind of it's straight from TCFD for what it's worth, and for people recognize this, that we talk about risk, but then what does that actually mean, right? And so they break it down into both a physical risk and transition risk, and then what do you do with that, right? Okay, well, what is the financial impact of that, and how do you mitigate that? And I think maybe Dion, you could talk a little bit more about, how to evaluate these, or, how to think about risk and specifically these types of risks.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you'll see on the left, you've got your physical risk. Those are your severe weather events. That's pretty straightforward. When we talk about transition risk, sometimes that's a little bit harder of a concept for people to wrap their heads around. At its sort of highest, its transition risks arise when a business or an economy is working to transition to a low carbon economy. And so SB 261, the California climate risk law, is a perfect example of a policy transition risk. Companies that aren't ready to comply with the law, that's one of their climate risks, right? They could face a $50,000 fine every single year for not doing this work, right? Technology advancements in redundancies in technology where severe weather events could undermine their business resilience, legal liabilities, reputational risks are all sort of rolled up into the policy liability and technology risks that we see fall under transition risks. Not having carbon pricing, for example, when carbon caps could be put in place, and then companies aren't ready to pay a premium for energy over and above a certain amount that they're or emissions that they're allowed to produce. And so those are all transition risks. And what's great about doing climate related risk assessment work, which TCFD is the framework that you use to figure these things out, and then put good decision making infrastructure and good management and mitigation practices in place, is those potential financial impacts. That's where there's overlap between a risk register that a company has been doing to figure out their broader business risks and then the specific climate related risks. So when you start to add financial impacts to this becomes a lot more real, and you start to see these integration points between climate related risks and just straight up business risks, because they're one and the same. Or I should say climate related risks are sort of a filter of some of your broader business risks.
Well, and I think, I mean, this is the where I get excited is like this isn't actually 100% new, right? Like a lot of these things exist somewhere within a lot of the companies that we've talked to, right? And it's a lot of the work is just figuring out who owns it. Is it somebody who's done, an insurance risk assessment on a facility? Is it somebody, is someone or done work around ISO 14,000 and environmental impacts, right? And then so they have, incorporated and evaluated some of these risks, but maybe not the full spectrum of physical and transition risk. And so then it's just kind of pushing that in, but they have some of the pieces already in play. And so, I think like these we're not starting from scratch is like a really good reminder. The work a lot of times is really just kind of making sure everybody is like reading and evaluating the same set of data, right? We have a cohesive data set. Um, and then uh, and then are making, and when I say we, like a company's making and can show that they're making decisions off of that data set, right? And so if we go to, I think it's the next slide. Um, I think this is a good, just like scaffolding of what that might look like, right? And Dion, I think when we were talking about this, and I may steal a point that you were going to make, but I think I really liked when you said, this is the reason the G is in ES and G, right? Is like all of the environmental and sustainability metrics and social metrics that we're being asked to track because they might have financial impacts as they relates to different businesses, right? Like we go back way back to the where we start, right? We don't want to have another financial collapse. We recognize that transparency is needed, so therefore we're asking companies to report more things. Well, the value of of what's being reported is built upon how you are governing those reportables, right? Like it's one thing to produce a 10K. It's another thing to say we actually have a robust process to make sure that 10K is quality and true and accurate, right? So maybe you can speak a little bit to this, and I hopefully didn't take too many of your talking points on this, but I do get really excited just because I think it exists already, right? Like we're already doing some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. When we talk about governance, it's like the governance around climate related risks and opportunities as it really this specific conversation. But governance in general is the way that companies manage risk, period. Right. And with good governance infrastructure in place, a company has good risk management, identification and management practices in place because they have that foundation to identify and do something about them over time. And so that's why governance is sort of this big, wrapping circle around the rest of those areas. These four areas are the categories of TCFD. And so they're therefore the four categories of this California law. Governance is that first one. Then we're looking at strategy, which is what are the actual and potential climate related risks, and I will say, and opportunities. Because there's still a lot of financial value in things that companies are doing. They're already mitigating risk, they're reducing expenses, and therefore there are opportunities there from a financial perspective. So all of that around climate related issues, how are they managing that climate related risk, which if they've got a good ERM in place, that can get folded in very quickly. They're probably already doing a lot of management around it. They just don't know it's climate related risk. It may be asset management, because they've got physical properties and they're trying to reduce their risk exposure. That's climate risk. And then that last piece being the metrics and targets, which are really, these are used to uh, manage the relevant climate related risks and opportunities. So it could be here are our company's goals for helping to minimize that risk and start to turn it into opportunity over time.
Yeah, I like that. And ERM, Enterprise Risk Management System, just to put a fine point on that. I won't define all the other acronyms I spit out earlier, but I think that a lot of companies do have a risk management system, something that they're using, either it's systemic or otherwise, in which that they are evaluating and building controls around potential risks. And a lot of this law is actually asking to do, and a lot of these laws are actually asking companies to do, is expand what you're including in that, right? Beyond what has traditionally been considered. And that feels a lot simpler than building an entirely new evaluation metric or matrix and reporting framework. It's simply just kind of expanding and now reporting to a new place. I think we put up earlier. There were two kind of central points on this. Address the risk and how do we evaluate that. Do you want to speak a little bit to the value chain strategy?
Yep.
How I think this is one of your slides that you thought was a good example, and I really like kind of how you laid this out. Maybe you can kind of speak to that.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at value chain, in this case, this applies to both SB 253 and SB 261 because 253, that emissions disclosure requirement, is through your supply chain. So you've got to have visibility. You have to understand your value chain first, and then you have to get visibility into the emissions, which for every industry, um, almost always makes up a significant proportion, right? So we see within manufacturing, your supply chain can be like 95, 98% of your entire corporate emissions impacts. And so that's why that is required in 253 is you can look at your operational emissions, but you also have to do it across supply chain. When it comes to climate risk is often embedded in your supply chain, right? And so we've seen countless examples where manufacturing was shut down. This happened a ton during COVID. The supply chains were all a mess. Companies didn't have visibility to their supply chains. They realized they have like one supplier of a very critical component um, of their product. And we actually had multiple clients that had these issues happen. For example, that weird freeze that happened in Houston, was it 2021? It shut down their entire production of their products because they had one supplier and that supplier lost power during the Houston freeze, which is a climate related weather event. That's all climate risk stuff, right? And so this framework, which, you guys can take away when the deck gets sent out, is a way that we help our clients understand how to approach their value chain, to work through all the pieces to help understand their value chain, prioritize where in their value chain they need to focus in these areas, how to engage and help their suppliers gain proficiency so that they can get what they need from their suppliers, how they can combine carrots and sticks with their suppliers to help move the needle there. Ways that they can get support through industry associations and collaborations and resources that may be beneficial for them and their industry to help prepare them to help their supply chain. Those internal governance mechanisms to build accountability around here's what we need to do to address our value chain and our supply chain, and then how to improve over time, because it's not a one-off, understanding and improving your value chain strategy when it comes to emissions, decarbonization, and climate risk. You've got to be able to start with, your lowest hanging fruit, for lack of a better phrase, and then iterate over time to gain proficiency. That's what's expected from these laws, is to demonstrate continuous improvement. And so that's a really critical component across your value chain.
And I mean, I think this is it, both very insightful, and I think it's like a great, as Dion said, everybody will get access to this, and it's also in another ways like pretty straightforward, right? Like it's like you gotta have to just start the process and start to under. I mean, it all kind of makes sense, I guess, is what I mean, right? Like um, you're being judged, and companies are being judged based on their value chain and being asked to report on that. And the way that we learn more about that is to learn more about that, right? And then engage and actually communicate with your suppliers. And we no longer are in an age where, you can claim that you're only responsible with it, what's in your four walls. And you're seeing that because, both from like what we talked about at a investor and country level, right? Is like they recognize that all of these companies uh, are part of a larger system, and they want to understand that system, right? So investors but also customers aren't buying from your four walls. They're buying the product that's made and all the upstream that hits to that. And so when you're that we don't even talk about this, but like all these metrics and all the kind of this engagement through your value chain has other opportunity that isn't just risk related, right? It's presenting the full value of the product that you're making to your customer. What are all of the upstream, benefits and impacts and inputs that are being captured in that final product? Um, so I think, if we kind of just like, I'll try to like recount the arc of the conversation today, which was we're going to talk about California laws. Just kidding. They paused the California laws, so we're not going to talk about the California laws. But that was a a kind of just such a great example of the like very real chaos and unpredictability of the world at the moment today. And as I think Dion said really well, our role, both as practitioners and clients and also companies in the space, is to be the ones that aren't adding to the chaos, right? To kind of find those, to gray out all of the acronyms, right? And find the ones that we can root ourselves in and build a foundation of work upon. And then that provides a level of stability both for our customers, but also our investors and also our value chain and our stakeholders, right? And so when we're thinking about that in terms of uh, the regulatory non-financial disclosure laws and these other pieces, I think Dion did a really good job of saying just like, look, TCFD from a climate perspective is really central to like understanding where we're reporting any of this work. And at the very heart of that, it's risk. And at the very heart of risk is business continuity, right? And understanding how your company is going to react as the inputs and ecosystem and other stuff change around it. And then look, they have actually structured that for you. They have physical risks and they have transition risks. So like you don't even have to come up with your own set of risks. And by the way, you're probably already evaluating these other sets of risks, so you just kind of pull that in, right? Incorporate that into your strategy. And so look, you're already doing part of it. We're just going to help you do the rest of it. And then you have a lot of that work is just find the different stakeholders within the company. Once we got that down, we're just kind of rolling into the next regulation. Be it CSRD, be it what the UK is doing, or Australia, or whatnot. We've kind of identified those metrics. We've built that into the strategy, and we have kind of an overarching governance structure to kind of manage that. And so we're ready at this point. And I think all of this is really, as the slide says, the work is really just uncovering these operational inefficiencies. And I think going way back to the beginning of this, and we said like, the work is inherently collaborative. Um, and I think it's like kind of a fine point on it to say that like, Uplift and Foresight presenting this together is inherent to like what this work requires at this moment, which is it's all about bringing in these different partners within the ecosystem. It's about talking to your value chain. It's about the CFO talking to the CSO, talking to the CEO, right, and making sure that they're all speaking around the same pieces. And that ultimately just makes better business and makes you more efficient. So I'm kind of I think excited about what comes out of this, and I actually really enjoy where this work kind of takes us. And I don't know, Dion, do you want to add any more pieces to that?
Yeah. I ultimately in my career, I've been doing sustainability the whole time, nonprofit and consulting. I do it because I want to do something that's going to improve the state of our planet. But what I really am fulfilled by on a day-to-day basis is helping our clients, corporations in the US and globally identify ways that they can work better and help break down silos within their own, departments and business units and things. Danny, I'm sure you've seen, when doing, for example, emissions inventories where, oh, a huge multinational company doesn't have an understanding of its total owned properties, right? These are just realities of business. No business has all the answers. And so doing this work, helping to bring together, like you said, finance, risk, legal, facilities, products, like all of these them together to do sustainability work, emissions related work, climate related risk work. It's a way of helping companies integrate their teams better for all areas of the business. And so, I really like this way of thinking about sustainability helps uncover operational efficiencies and then solve some of them in order to improve business resilience. And when you think about these laws that, the emissions laws, the climate related risk laws, they are enabling that to happen. And so I think
Hmm.
stop chasing the regulations, stop thinking about compliance checklists, and start thinking about how this can improve your business resilience is really the right mindset for all of us to have around these issues.
Yeah. We do have some time as we plan to for some questions. So I would encourage if you have questions, throw it into the Q&A. And and it's always fun if they're not related to this. You can just ask us whatever you've um and and we'll do our best to answer that. So um but I don't think we have and oh there we go. Okay, what would you recommend to companies that have not gotten started yet or who have leaders who do not understand the business value of climate risk that you articulated? How do we build a business case? This feels resonant. because I think a lot of companies and a lot of sustainability professionals are in this space, right? They're trying to articulate up, hey, this is important, it needs your attention. Um, Dion, what's your take on
Yeah.
that?
This work can feel overwhelming when you haven't done it before. And so I would say, I mean, obviously, please work with consultants who are experts in this if you can. But if that's not possible as a first step, I would definitely say spend some time with TCFD to understand what it is. It's not a super duper heavy read. It's kind of high level guidance. But to what we spoke about earlier, spending some time mapping out what your company already does in these areas is a really good exercise to help you, your team, and your leaders see that you're not as far away from this work as you may think. And so it's one of the things that we do at the very beginning is a gap analysis against all the TCFD pieces of guidance to see what do you already have, where are your gaps, and then build a plan on how to iterate over time. Let's prioritize these things. When it comes to business case, I think, if you're able to remember some of the things that Danny and I have said on the call about tying this to business resilience, tying this to existing building business governance and strategy, then you have a solid foundation for that business case. Danny, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the look at what you've already done is a great starting point. I mean, it is actually the starting point, right? The disclosure, the California, how do they word it? But essentially, show us what you've done, and if you're not doing it, explain why, right? And I think that it's you'll find that you're making progress in a lot of these spaces. They're not blank pieces. And I think also just on a tactical level, like where are the other places that you're already doing some of this work? Someone mentioned CDP and EcoVadis. There are already disclosure efforts in play that you may already be doing that are already asking these questions. And it may be even as simple as, hey, you answered this in CDP. Is this still the corporate response? And that's your starting point, right? And then, kind of building upon that. Um, I like this question. How do you see this changing the landscape for 2050? I'm curious, Dion, because I mean, what a great open-ended question. Because uh, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I will tell you what I see. There's so much whiplash and uncertainty, politically speaking, that I actually think there's going to be a very rocky road to it's going to be like this instead of a straight line, but I think we're going to get to the same place in 2050, at least I hope, which is this is going to continue to gain momentum and it's going to become expected of all corporations globally to do this type of work. One from an emissions reporting standpoint, which I'll kind of touch on this next question around emissions. Scope 1 and 2 emissions, in my opinion, have kind of become table stakes for companies to report and disclose, even though it's not widely required from a regulatory standpoint. I think scope 3 is where the efforts are really to understand and improve upon, which we're seeing with this type of regulation. So I think by 2050, companies will just have to integrate annual reporting around their emissions across their value chain. I think when it comes to climate risk, it's going to be the same is going to follow, but also companies are going to want to do this type of work because we are seeing significant increases in climate related events cause problems for businesses and economic stability. So by 2050, we're likely to see this as kind of a critical piece of an annual business, review process. It gets integrated into broader business risk management because it's becoming more and more and more important. The World Economic Forum every year puts out a global risks report of global risks, period. And climate related events are like top five. And they've over the last few years become closer and closer. I don't know what the report says this year, but like top three, I think now is severe weather events disrupting the global economy, right? So by 2050, I think this is going to be the issue that is focused on.
Well, and I think one of the things that I've been really harping on recently is this is all happening at the same time that we're seeing diminishing returns on efficiency work. And I mean, efficiency work in the context of facilities, right? Like boilers are becoming, you're never going to get to 100% efficiency on just, energy conversion. But even, supply chain efficiency, we're seeing, in efficiency of the markets themselves, right? All of this, we're putting money in to squeeze out less and less and less, right? And at the same time, we're seeing more chaos and more disruption where the leanness of those efficiency efforts has becomes more and more of a risk, right? And so we see this chaos. The energy, the EIA, right, puts out the energy projections, right? And so they recently put one out, and they added in a new scenario. So they had some positive looking, kind of like, hey, that emissions will kind of trend downward or maybe not increase as much, but they've gone back to a business as usual scenario included in their full spectrum of modeling. And that isn't to say, like, to your point, Dion, what the future looks like. What that says to me is that there's actually a wider spectrum of what the possibilities could be in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And now all of that just points again to this like chaos, right? This just unpredictability of things. We talked about this with a client this morning around the energy markets. Have seen, we all this conversation around data centers and increase in energy costs. And if you look at the line of increased capacity, it's like pretty level up until like 21, 22, and now we're seeing like 6x increases in energy, right? And it's just things have shifted into a new moment in time, and to be a competitive business in that space is no longer to be the one that is doing everything most efficiently, the making things the fastest. It's literally the ones that are able to weather the storm. And so the regulation kind of pulls that. And I think, your comment around that, I'll name just the greenhouse gas data. It is, I mean, I think table stakes. I think I there's a longer conversation around like how granular you need to like fully get these scope 3 emissions before you do all the things you need to do. I think Dion, your that chart we had on there, I don't think on there it said you have to collect every utility bill from every supplier all the way down to the cradle of every material that you buy, right? It really just said like you have to know your supply chain, you have to know who you're buying from, and you have to kind of understand their footprints. And so I think the work stays the same, right? Like, or the work is still relevant, but like there is a level which we can still make decisions without having like get at the super granular piece, and it has this CDP, EcoVadis, et cetera, kind of value to it. Um, the the question the next question here is around low-hanging projects, and I think projects in quotes is to demonstrate value as it relates to risk assessments. I have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious, Dion, how do you think about that? Like, if you're a head of sustainability or you're working on that, how do you kind of translate this so it's not a tax on the company?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good ways to do it. The one that comes to mind, the first for me is that if you have, a lot of private companies do risk risk assessments every year, every 2 years. I would take a look at what you already have in place around your risks and do a small exercise to connect those to or further define them in ways of climate risk. And so it's a really quick way to start to tie those two together because there's a ton of overlap and a lot of them are one and the same, and it'll help you and the rest of the company and your leadership start to see where those commonalities are.
Yeah, I think also there are there are efforts that companies are already doing. I think even just like from a governance standpoint, ISO 14000 work can be easily translated to say like, look, we're already doing some of this work as it relates to assessing impacts and aspects and there's easy ways, easy I'll use, but like there are ways to incorporate the climate into that space. And so I think maybe my answer to that question is there are efforts within companies that somebody sees value in, and then attaching and adding your own inputs on that to make it usable in another space to avoid a $50,000 fine, to avoid, a full engagement somewhere else is maybe like, the value add project on that. Um, do you want to take a guess on how long it will take California regulations to be resolved?
My answer is I have no idea. The courts do what the courts do. I wish I could give you an answer there.
I will I will say that if we think that it'll take a long time, it'll take a short amount of time, and if we think it'll take a short amount of time, it'll take a long amount of time. And so, to the just like stay the course, kind of ch chip away at what you have, and then report when you need to report. I think is probably kind of the best
Yeah.
advice on that.
I will
Um,
say, I think the courts understand how many businesses are impacted by their decision. And so they are likely to move this forward at a pace that aligns with that understanding.
The location-based, market-based, how should your answers differ? We internally, I think, have had just in the last like 2 weeks had hours of discussion around market-based emissions pieces. Um, what's do you want to take a stab at that? I like carbon accounting. I don't mind.
I have a team of carbon accountants that could answer that question. I would be out of my depth in attempting it.
Yeah, the I think the root of how you should answer that, I think, is you should have a strategy, or you should have an energy strategy. You should have a strategy for how you manage your energy and how you manage your emissions, and your reporting should match that, right? So if your strategy, and I'll give you an example, if your strategy is to own your own energy and to have agency and control over that, and that means on-site renewables and decarbonization work within your facilities, then your reporting should match that, right? I think there's value in that. If your strategy includes market-based efforts, then you absolutely should be reporting market-based emissions. And that means if you're buying PPAs or VPPAs, or you have green power agreements with your utility, you need to have credit for that. You should because that's part of the business strategy. And kind of, I'm just going to like go right back to our presentation, which is, the reason you're even being asked to report on this is because somebody wants to know about your strategic approach to climate and emissions. And so all of these numbers that you're reporting and how you report them is telling a story around how you're managing those things. So hopefully that answers that question. Um, I can dig more into that. And the scope two emissions rules are changing and shifting kind of as we talk, but I think that still holds true. Oh, and I'm sorry. I know we have one more question. We do have a webinar next month. Um, I think I might be on this one too, but that we have the more important people, Lisa Bruni McDermott from H&I, Glenda Hernandez and Blair from Allison Transmission, and Barry Slowly from Cook Medical will all be guests on next month's webinar. So please attend. I will answer this last question. If anybody has any other ones, feel free to throw them in the chat. Um, Dion, do you have an opinion on scope three categories?
Yeah, I mean, when one of what we do with our clients first and foremost around scope three is understand their value chain. What are the relevant 15 scope three categories? And then we do a materiality assessment of that to understand sort of the proportion of emissions in their scope three that is made up of those categories, just broad estimates. And we start with the ones that have the biggest proportion and dig in. And so, the most likely to have slash easily get info to answer depends on which of those categories are your biggest categories to start from. Um, I don't know, Danny, if you have a different experience, but in my experience, there are not often companies that have all 15 categories that are relevant and all 15
Oh
categories that
yeah.
are material. And so it is not typically expected that you do all of it.
Yeah, I think the one like misunderstanding I think around scope three is that um doing more categories inherently costs more and doing less categories inherently costs less. The cost around doing scope three is the depth. It is what are you trying to fully understand around this? And so, my attitude is very similar, in my opinion, is very similar to what Dion discussed. Is the most effective strategy is to take a broad brush to the whole 15, just to understand which ones are material and which ones are relevant. I mean, uh, we can use financial data and do a financial kind of screening for those scope threes. I would not advise you to manage those emissions using financial data because the only way you can kind of reduce those emissions is spending less money. And if your business is growing, that's maybe not the approach you want to take. But that is, maybe the starting point. My other answer to that is, with a lot of industries, you already know, what the material categories are going to be based on the industry itself. And so there's value in just like, hey, if you want to dig in and manage it today, you already know what you want to manage, then pick those categories. And it's almost for at least most of our clients, it's always category one, right, is in there. And that's products and services. And that's where, it spider webs into like how do you engage your supply chain? What questions are you asking them? Is kind of all sits in there. And that the depth of that gets to like how deep you want to and how much you want to engage and what you want to control and what your goals are for it. So I guess that was a very like ambiguous answer. It's all of them or one of them. So, but I appreciate everybody sticking around and thanks for the questions. And I hope y'all can tune in at the next one and we will send out a recap as it goes. And Dion, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.